So who is the most determined person that you know? The other day at lunch, my husband Jim and I were discussing this question, and once I clarified that I was asking about somebody that we knew personally, but not somebody famous, we actually came up with the same answer. And it was our son Matthew, but for different reasons. Jim talked about how determined Matthew was on the soccer field. And as a defender, it didn't matter what was going on in the game, if the team was winning or losing, or how large the opposing players were, how stronger they might have been. Matthew was dauntless in his determination to guard his goal. I, on the other hand, talked about how relentless Matthew has been in his determination to get me to agree to have a dog. For years, whenever we see a dog, whether it's on TV, if it's walking down the street, or when we're driving, Matthew says to me, "Can we get one?" And since he's been doing it for years, I often try to ignore the question, but if I can't ignore the question, I will again explain all of the reasons why our family system would not work and make a good home for a dog. So at this point, I don't actually know if Matthew is relentlessly committed to us getting a dog or just to annoying his mother. But in any case, he has failed at the first and has been wildly successful at the second. But it is that trait, that relentless, dauntless, courageous, and bold determination that we celebrate this morning, on this Palm Sunday morning, on this time that was foretold in the psalm about entering gates with thanksgiving. It is this trait of dauntless determination that we celebrate, because so long ago, as Jesus rode into Jerusalem, he was showing incredible forbearance, courage. He was being bold. He was being dauntlessly determined, because he rode into Jerusalem as a wanted man. Religious and civic authorities were seeking to find some reason to arrest him and to do away with him. And Jesus rode right into the very apex of their power. He rode in on a lowly donkey to confront the greatest powers of his day. He could have stayed hidden away, but no, he boldly and with dauntless determination rode into Jerusalem to confront those he disagreed with. And yet, in some way, this scene shouldn't be all that surprising to us, because if you look at Jesus' life, the breadth of his life, he lived dauntless determination. So when Jesus was just 12 years old, just a boy, he showed dauntless determination in his desire to learn. And throughout his life, he was dauntless in his determination to inspire in others a commitment to teach and to learn, and specifically to teach and to learn the truth. Now, Jesus and his family, every single year, they would go to Jerusalem at Passover to celebrate in the temple. But when Jesus was 12 years old, it was a different experience for him in that temple. He was different. He was so thirsty and so hungry to learn that all that he possibly could from the rabbis in the temple, those who were expert in scripture and in faith. And so he stayed at that temple in order to soak in all that he could, in order to learn. And he engaged in a kind of teaching technique called sparring that was common. It's where the rabbi would offer an interpretation of a passage of scripture or offer an idea, and then the students would question it, and then the student would offer an idea or an explanation, and then the rabbis would question it, and this would go on for hours. And Jesus didn't just soak it in either. It is said that in scripture that people were amazed at his understanding and at his answers. Jesus was dauntless in his determination to know and understand all he could about Scripture, to get what he could from those rabbis, and then to roll it around in his mind as he determined how best to be faithful, how best to do God's will in the world, what Scripture meant, and how to live that out. And throughout his life, he inspired that in others, that commitment to hear about scriptures and to work with scriptures and to then to determine how to have a most faithful life. There's a way about that sounds sort of easy, doesn't it? That we just read scripture, we understand it, and then we create a faithful life and we know what truth is. And yet, it's far more difficult than that to come up with an intelligent position. It actually requires some work, some intentionality, some study, and some research. And from what we know from this week in the news, we know that that's actually something a lot of people don't do. They don't take the time to do research and to think and work things out. And that there are also people who are determined to sway us with opinions rather than to help us form informed thoughts and positions. And so this week there was a lot in the news about how social media sites were giving away personal data about people, especially on Facebook, that there were companies and individuals and firms that were being paid by political campaigns. And those people were getting into other people's social media sites and gaining personal data and information. And so Facebook is actually struggling a lot with that. They've had a lot of criticism about what they have allowed to happen. But what's really concerning is that these individuals and firms then have used what's called psychographic profiling. So that means that what these companies are doing is that they look at what we do on Facebook or other social media sites. So if you take a quiz on Facebook, or you like something, or you don't like something, or you check in at a restaurant, or you say you bought something, then these companies can take that information and then they target you back with an opinion or a thought that they think you'll grab onto. Not based on fact or research or an informed decision, but just trying to grab your emotions grab at your fears, grab at your anger, grab at your anxiety. So, for example, in case you're not that familiar with social media, if I were to take a quiz on Facebook and I said, I cannot stand watermelons, but I love peaches, then these firms might then say to me, when Kent Harrop runs for president, don't vote for him because he's going to make everybody eat watermelon every single day. But you can vote for Karen because Karen loves peaches. Now, there is nothing about that that's based on fact or reality. It's grabbing at us. And so what that tells us is that if we're going to be followers of Jesus, that man who promoted with determination, teaching and learning, it says that when we're going to vote for someone, when we're going to think about bills that might be passing, when we're going to make a decision about how to live a faithful life, we can't take shortcuts. We can't just look at what we've read online, but we've got to think about it, research and study, and make good and informed decisions. At 12, Jesus began to show just how dauntlessly determined he was, and that he was determined to teach and to learn, and to teach and learn what was truth, and there were no shortcuts in that at all. And then if we move forward, or more into Jesus's life and ministry, as he began to go around the countryside teaching and preaching and healing, we see another facet of his determination. Jesus was dauntlessly determined to inspire generosity, to bring out generosity in people. Jesus believed that a blessed life was a life that was full of generosity. Gifts that we've been given are gifts that are to be shared. Blessings given are blessings that ought to be shared. In his sermon, Reverend William Carter, the sermon was "The Best Things Are Borrowed," talks about the fact that Jesus actually never owned very much, and he borrowed a lot, thus inspiring generosity. Think about it. He was born in a borrowed stable. He borrowed a donkey in order to ride into Jerusalem. He borrowed an upper room to have his last meal with his disciples. He was buried in a borrowed tomb. And whenever he was traveling, preaching, and teaching, he didn't make reservations at the local inn, and he didn't dine at fine restaurants. He either accepted hospitality or he asked for it. And so there was the one time when Jesus was walking into a town where Zacchaeus lived. Zacchaeus was a tax collector known to be a cheat, that he had stolen lots of money from people as he collected taxes. And Zacchaeus, in order to see what was going on, had climbed up into a tree. And so Jesus looked at Zacchaeus and said, "Come on down. I need to stay with you tonight." And Zacchaeus offered him hospitality. And Zacchaeus was changed by that. He gave back all of the money he had stolen from people and even more. There was just something about Jesus and his determination, his bold, courageous determination to bring out generosity in others. So, not to brag too much, but this past week, I was an incredible example of generosity. Jim had his birthday this past week, and the one thing he wanted was to go see the movie Black Panther. Now, Black Panther is getting incredible reviews, but it's a Marvel movie, so that means it's an action movie. So there's warfare, there's weapons, there's blood, there's trouble, and it's not my kind of movie. Everybody else in the family loves these movies, especially because they're make-believe, but they're not my kind of movie, but neither child was available to go with Jim. So I very generously offered to go with him. And again, it's not my kind of movie. During parts of the movie, I had my hands over my ears. I had my eyes closed. I actually cried at one of the battle scenes because I so don't like it. And I was really feeling incredibly magnanimous for having not only taken Jim to the movie, but I didn't walk out of it. I stayed. Now, we had been told that we should stay through the credits because there were a couple of extra scenes in the credits. So we did. And so the first scene, I could not believe it because the central character is making a speech and says, "Now more than ever." The first 4 words of our annual theme. And I thought, maybe I'm going to get something good out of all of this agony. And I did. I have something to say this morning. So I don't want to spoil it for those of you who might be interested in going to the movie. But Black Panther is about an African country called Wakanda. And Wakanda is in the midst of a leadership battle between cousins about who is going to be king. Wakanda to the rest of the world is known as a poor farming country, but it actually is a country that has great advancements in technology. And so some of those advancements are used for ill, like warfare, but also some of its advancements are used for good, like healing and communication and transportation. So after the leadership battle has been settled, the Wakanda people decide that they need to change their perspective on the world. Up until this point, they had been an isolated country, only taking care of themselves. But for some reason, after this leadership battle, they realized how selfish and greedy that had been, and that they actually had much to offer the world. So they decided to be less of an isolationist country. And so King T'Challa decides to go to the United Nations and to bring Wakanda into the United Nations. And he makes this speech when he's there at the UN. He says, "Wakanda will no longer watch from the shadows. We cannot, we must not. We will work to be an example of how we, as brothers and sisters on this earth, should treat each other. Now, more than ever, the illusions of division threaten our very existence. We all know the truth more connects us than separates us. But in times of crisis, the wise build bridges while the foolish build barriers. We must find a way to look after one another as if we were one single tribe." And so Wakanda, the people of Wakanda and its leaders decide to open outreach centers around the world, offering their science and technology to help other countries and other people. Their selfishness and greediness almost cost them their existence. Their generosity brought them into a hopeful future. Jesus was dauntless in his determination. He was dauntless in his determination to bring out generosity and inspire in others. He was dauntless in his determination to teach and to learn. And then this morning, on this Palm Sunday, we think about his courageous ride into Jerusalem to confront powers and systems that he believed were abusive and vile, corrupt and harmful, systems that he believed were not helping people but were hurting people. And since that time that Jesus rode into Jerusalem, people of faith have and continue to follow his example of confronting powers that are abusive, that seek to tear down rather than build up, to harm rather than heal, to divide rather than to unite. People of faith, it is part of our responsibility to be inspired by this ride, to confront those powers that are corrupt, that are wrong, that are difficult. This has been a weekend where people have been doing that. Around the world, there have been demonstrations called March for Our Lives. And I am sure in this room, we have a lot of different opinions about gun and gun ownership. But it is my hope that we have no difference of opinion about the fact that children, those children that sang for us, those children that were on the steps, that they should be able to go to school and not have to worry about whether or not they're going to be alive in order to come home. And so those children at Parkland, they decided not to remain silent victims, but to ride in and to confront and to ask our nation, our powers, our leaders, please make some changes so that we can be safe when we're kept at school. One of the survivors in Parkland has said, "We are the mass shooting generation." And he talked about hiding in a closet and not knowing if, when the door opened, if it was going to be the police or the shooter. That's just terrible. Those kids are in front of us, and we need to step out. We need to do what we can to make sure our children can go to school and be safe. There was this demonstration yesterday at Lynch Park, and this was one of the youngest speakers, an 8th grader, a 3rd grader, who spoke to the crowd. It was a moving time to be there together. But whenever we confront powers that are not building up but are tearing down, it is, as people of faith, our responsibility to follow Jesus' lead and with dauntless, courageous, bold determination to confront. It did cost Jesus' life. It's not without risk, but it is what's asked of us. So on this Palm Sunday, we remember Jesus and his dauntless determination, a determination he carried with him his entire life from when he was a young boy until that last week of his life. May we follow his example. May we be dauntlessly determined to be faithful people. What are you determined to do?